I'm outside Les Invalides in Paris today, watching people drift past the courtyard, and it's oddly calm for a place built for war. Look at the dome and the stone cannons by the gates. This story isn't only about battles, it's about how power gets organized, spent, and defended. Right inside is Napoleon's tomb, and the fact that he ends up here tells you something. Wars don't just end, they get packaged into memory. So to understand why this place matters, we have to go back to the early 1800s, when Europe keeps moving and nobody feels steady. In those years, a law changes, a border shifts, a ship stops sailing, and suddenly a baker pays more for flour. People notice the war at the counter. The mechanism is simple and brutal. Governments raise armies, armies eat and march, and someone has to find the money and the supplies every week. But here's the awkward part. Napoleon wins spectacularly, and the pressure still grows because every victory creates new enemies and new bills. Our route follows that pressure. Austerlitz, then Trafalgar, then Berlin and the ports, then the Niemen, and finally Waterloo and St. Helena. And we start with a hill in winter, Pratzen Heights, because one cold morning there turns a plan into an order, and an order into a continent-wide cost. I'm up on the Pratzen Heights now, and the wind cuts straight through my coat, and the whole field below is white and strangely quiet. You can see why commanders want this ridge. Anyone standing here watches roads, villages, and columns moving like dark threads in the snow.
The Allied army holds this ridge because it looks safe, so Napoleon lets them settle and watches their lines stretch thin. He keeps his center looking weak because he wants their main move to flow downhill toward the villages, away from this height. And then, when their columns commit and the snow hides the speed of his march, he pushes up here fast and cuts their army in two. So, the fight isn't only about bravery on a slope, it's about timing, fog, and how long a messenger takes to find the right general. Once the ridge is lost, orders arrive too late, units move without knowing why, and panic travels faster than any drum or trumpet. By midday, the coalition's plan still exists on paper, but here on the ground, it breaks into separate battles that can't help each other.
Down by this farmhouse, people crowd a table and a stove, and you feel how a battle turns into messages, orders, and delays in minutes.
This farm becomes a nerve center because Napoleon's staff tracks where each corps sits, how much daylight is left, and which roads stay open. Riders arrive with rough reports, aides turn them into clear orders, and every minute lost here becomes extra blood out on the ridge. So, it comes down to basics: a horse that slips on ice, a bridge that clogs with wagons, a courier who takes the wrong road. When the staff reads it right, divisions move together. When it reads it wrong, units march into smoke with no support.
In Telnitz, the houses sit tight along the road, and even today you can picture soldiers pressing into doorways because there's nowhere else to go. I'm looking at a small bridge over a stream, and it's obvious why men die here. Everyone needs the same crossing at the same time.
In Telnitz and Sokolnitz, the fight turns close and messy because villages squeeze troops into lanes and courtyards. French units shove for bridges and stream crossings, while Russian and Austrian soldiers hold doorways and keep the southern road open. Civilians can't get far in this snow, so families hide in cellars, animals freeze in sheds, and a stray shell can light a roof. Every minute here carries weight. If the Allies hold these crossings, they can swing on Napoleon's flank and keep his center exposed. But once Pratzen is lost, these village positions become a trap, because retreat must funnel through the same streets and bridges.
At the frozen ponds, the surface looks firm, but the edges are thin, and the wind keeps pushing snow across the ice like it's trying to hide cracks.
By the ponds, the weather stops being background, because men carry wet coats, numb fingers, and muskets that misfire when powder clumps. When units break and run, they head for what looks like open ground, and ice can look solid from a distance. Some make it across, some fall through, and the rest lose wagons and guns while officers try to pull order back out of a crowd. Afterward, stories simplify this into one big moment, but the cost is quieter: prisoners, frostbite, and a retreat that turns desperate.
When this day ends, Napoleon looks unbeatable on land, so we move to the sea next, because Britain answers by cutting routes and chasing fleets. I'm on the harbour edge in Cadiz, watching men coil lines and shove crates, and you can feel how a city holds its breath when ships don't move. People here still talk about the day the sea filled with canvas. If fleets get trapped, the whole port goes hungry, not just the navy.
France needs sea control to move troops and threaten Britain, so the fleets gather here and in nearby waters. Britain sees that risk and keeps ships outside the harbor, forcing a fight where escape routes shrink.
I'm driving out to Cape Trafalgar now, and this headland makes sense immediately. You can stand here and measure distance without guessing.
After Trafalgar, Britain holds sea lanes more confidently, which means France can't protect long crossings or move invasions without huge risk. So the pressure shifts. Napoleon leans harder on land power, and Britain leans on trade, credit, and the ability to fund coalitions. In practice, fewer French-backed ships sail safely, insurance costs climb, and neutral captains start calculating routes like gamblers. And because Britain can raid commerce, coastal towns feel it first. Less cargo, fewer jobs, and more young men pushed into service.
On the deck of HMS Victory, the boards are narrow under your feet, and it's easy to imagine how crowded this becomes when the guns start. Down here by a cannon port, the space is tight and dark, you're shoulder to shoulder, and the air has that old wood smell that never leaves.
A battle at sea is a machine under stress because every task depends on another crew doing theirs on time. Gun teams load, run out, swab, and reload, while boys carry powder and officers shout through smoke that stings the eyes. When Nelson breaks the line, ships slam into close range, so splinters fly and decks turn slick, not with drama, but with routine injury. A sailor who loses a hand still has to move, or someone else falls. A surgeon below works fast because infection kills later, even if the shot misses now. And when the firing ends, the victory still costs months of recovery, because a damaged fleet needs repairs, pay, and supplies before it can sail again.
In London, outside the Admiralty, the stone is wet and dark, and clerks hurry in with folders like the war is a schedule they can't miss.
Ministers use the Navy as leverage because control of shipping lets them pressure allies and enemies without marching. Parliament argues over costs, but credit keeps flowing and coalitions keep forming.
Okay, so once the sea route closes, the war doesn't pause. It reroutes through goods, money, and who gets to buy what without being stopped.
That's where the blockade logic hardens, because Britain can choke trade from outside, and Napoleon tries to choke it from inside Europe.
Which means the next fight isn't a single battle at all. It's customs houses, warehouses, and people taking risks at night to keep buying basics.
In Berlin, the order becomes policy, because Napoleon forces Prussia into the continental system and signs the Berlin Decree. It bans British trade, but it also tells every clerk and customs officer what counts as illegal. So, prices jump, merchants hide stock, and ministers promise crackdowns. They can't really deliver, even on day one.
I'm in a Berlin office with a heavy desk and a red wax seal on a decree, and you can see how one signature turns into raids, fines, and fear.
Now I'm at a damp continental port, watching dock workers roll barrels under tarps, because once sea access shrinks, every crate matters more.
The problem is the ports, because Europe still needs coffee, sugar, dye, cotton, and the tools that arrive by sea. So, a blockade turns into routines. Inspectors check manifests, guards seal warehouses, and captains pay fees for papers that might be void tomorrow. British cruisers grab ships outside, and French-aligned customs grab bales inside, which means traders look for flags, forged stamps, and side channels. In practice, fewer cargoes clear legally, so cloth gets scarce, substitutes get worse, and dock workers feel it first when shifts get cut.
Out on the coast at night, it's different. Fog, rain, a dark line of surf, and men moving without lanterns because they don't want witnesses. When a small boat comes in like this, what's the first thing that happens on the beach before anyone even talks about money? And if customs patrols tighten the next week, what do smugglers change first? Routes, bribes, or who they sell to? First, they move the landing spot, because a beach is only safe once. They pick a new cove, then use locals to watch the road. The goods are small and valuable, cloth, sugar, coffee, so they hide them fast in carts or under fish and split the load.
And yes, bribes matter, but trust matters more. If a mayor talks or a guard wants glory, people get jailed or shot.
Smuggling grows because the rules are predictable, and predictable rules create profit. A boat lands in fog with British cloth or colonial sugar, a middleman spreads it through inns and back rooms, and a local official decides whether to chase or take a cut. So the continental system starts punishing Napoleon's partners as much as Britain, because Holland, northern Germany, and Italy lose revenue when legal trade dries up. Shopkeepers keep doors open by selling contraband, but they raise prices to cover bribes and risk, and ordinary families notice when soap, coffee, and decent fabric disappear. And every seizure creates a new workaround, which means enforcement keeps expanding and the resentment keeps traveling inland.
Back in Paris at the customs desks, it's stacks of registers and ink-stained fingers, and the mood is dry because every argument ends in a stamp.
In Paris, the blockade becomes paperwork because the state tries to control a continent with stamps, ledgers, and patrols. Officials issue licenses to chosen firms, then revoke them. So traders gamble on connections instead of cargo. Custom squads raid shops, seize stock, and find towns that can't prove where a barrel came from, which pushes mayors to plead for exceptions. So the system feeds itself. More rules create more loopholes, and more loopholes justify more policing. By the time ministers talk about tightening again, they're already thinking about force because trade pressure turns into military pressure.
And that's how a fight over goods becomes a fight over borders, because when trade won't bend people, Napoleon tries to make it bend with an army. I'm standing by the Niemen in early summer of 1812, and the air is dry, boots kick up dust where an army wants to cross fast. You see wagons, horses and men packed tight at the waterline, and the simplest risk is already here. If they stall, the supplies stall too.
Napoleon crosses the Niemen because trade pressure turns into strategy, and he thinks one hard march forces Russia back in line. He brings a huge army, but that size needs bread, fodder, shoes, and clear roads every day. So the map matters less than the wagons because heat and dust slow them, horses drop, and units spread out looking for food. And once the columns stretch, orders arrive late, which means a small delay at a bridge can ripple into days of hunger.
In Vilnius, I'm by storehouses and a long line of carts, and clerks keep writing while soldiers wait for bread that isn't arriving on time.
Vilnius fills with paperwork and waiting because supplies arrive late and commanders demand numbers that can't be met. Quartermasters requisition grain, but carts break and local stores are thin, so soldiers barter, steal, and waste hours searching. Hospitals take in men with blisters and fever, and clerks try to track regiments that keep changing roads. So the rear collapses in slow motion, pay slips, bread rations shrink, and discipline turns into punishment. By the time the army pushes on, the tail of the march is already losing men without fighting a battle.
At Smolensk, I'm looking at blackened walls and broken beams, and it's clear the army is stepping into places it can't live off anymore.
At Smolensk, the campaign starts burning its own fuel because the city fight costs time and shells that can't be replaced quickly. Fires spread through streets, civilians flee with carts, and French units loot food that disappears in a day. So, victory doesn't solve the supply problem. It makes it sharper because the army marches past ruins with nothing left to buy. And the longer it goes, the more horses die, which means fewer wagons move, and each step forward eats the chance to return.
On the Borodino field, the ground is open and flat, and I'm standing near an earthwork where men have to advance with no cover. Smoke hangs low, officers try to pull lines straight again, and the question isn't courage, it's how many bodies a plan can afford.
Borodino becomes a resource test because both sides feed men into the same ground until units stop being units and become fragments. French artillery pounds earthworks, Russian infantry holds, and commanders keep asking for one more push that costs another brigade. Medics work in open fields, water runs out, and wounded men block the paths that fresh troops need. So even when Napoleon stays on the field, he can't turn it into a clean decision, because his reserves are limited and his army is tired. By night, thousands are gone, and the survivors still have to march, which means the battle doesn't end the campaign, it weighs it down. Moscow should be the prize, because a capital usually means stores, shelter, and a government ready to negotiate. But the city empties and burns, so French soldiers roam for food and find ash, broken barrels, and locked cellars. Officers post guards, but they can't stop looting when men are hungry, and cold nights start arriving. So Napoleon waits for a message that doesn't come, while his army eats what remains and the first snow threatens the roads back. In practice, the center gives him nothing he can use, and every day here makes the retreat harder to organize.
I'm in a silent street with shutters closed and no carts moving, and that quiet is the warning. An army can't camp on emptiness.
Now the march turns around, and it stops being about taking ground. It's about keeping people alive long enough to reach a river crossing.
When the retreat hits the Berezina, what's the first breakdown you see? Command, supplies, or just people's bodies giving out? And on the actual crossings, Who decides who goes first when thousands are pushing forward and the enemy is close?
The first failure is food and heat, because men can't march on frost and hunger. Once they stop, the retreat jams. At the bridges, engineers and guards try to set lanes, but crowds surge, a cart tips, and the whole line freezes in place. Officers can threaten, but they also cut loose wagons and guns, because saving equipment starts killing the people hauling it.
By the Berezina, the army is no longer a system. It is groups searching for bridges, fuel, and a place to sleep. Engineers build crossings under fire, guards hold back crowds, and people drop packs because carrying them means dying. So, the story of control falls apart because officers can't feed men, allies stop helping, and discipline collapses. News of this retreat spreads across Europe fast, and capitals decide they can fight again, because Napoleon is no longer unstoppable.
I'm on the Waterloo field with wet grass under my boots and wind in my mic, and this is the last knot where everyone's debts come due.
Waterloo happens because the coalition learns to cooperate, and because Napoleon's army can't recover the losses from 1812. The ground is soaked, so attacks slow, guns bog down, and messages take longer to reach the right units. When the French push stalls and reserves run out, the line breaks, and that collapse ends his last bid for power in Europe. Exile works as a tool because distance and surveillance stop Napoleon from bargaining with allies or rallying soldiers. On St. Helena, he lives under rules, writes, argues, and waits, and the world moves on without needing him to sign or command anything.
On St. Helena, the air feels different, salt, damp, and isolated, and the house is small enough that his world shrinks to rooms and rules.
Back in Paris, this tomb makes him a symbol, but the wars still leave debts, borders, and veterans queuing for pay.
And outside Les Invalides at dusk, rain darkens the stone and the courtyard stays calm. So next time, let's follow what Europe builds after the guns stop.